That's good, good, Cindy, that they didn't get our conversation on tape. Okay, Cindy Tank Murphy is a best-selling author, international speaker, and mental health advocate, passionate about writing and sharing healing stories based on personal experience. Cindy offers a unique perspective to the conversation around surviving suicide and the mental health epidemic. Your printing's very little. Cindy believes we can eliminate the stigma associated with mental health through awareness and open dialogue, ultimately saving lives. She provides support, personal coaching, and shares monthly on her newsletter at www. What is it?
Strengthtolive.com.
Okay, and I will put this in the minutes. I'm the secretary, so I'll put that in the minutes so people have it. And here's Cindy. I just love my Cindy.
Thank you, Joyce.
I have both books here.
There we go. And there's the rest of our group.
Oh, hello, everyone. So nice to see you all. And thank you for that lovely introduction, Joyce. And thank you, Laura, for setting this up for me to come in and speak in this format. My only wish was that I was there live with you all. That would be the perfect thing to do. But I am honored to speak with your group, and especially to a group of women who are committed to act boldly and for justice and transform your communities, because this is the perfect group to talk to, because when I share my story, I know that it will just multiply into good things. So before we begin, I just want to start with a few housekeeping items. What I like to do at most of my live talks is I like to hand out these little note cards so that you can jot down notes. So hopefully you have a little piece of paper next to you. And if you have a question that comes up while I'm speaking, please just jot it down, because I know I'm going to talk for about 30 or 40 minutes. Sometimes you forget your question. I want you to remember that. And don't be afraid to ask anything at the end, because if you have the question, I'm sure someone else in the room does too. And that's what this is all about, is about sharing our thoughts and questions and having a dialogue and conversation about this. And just to give you a little highlight of what I'll talk about today, I will read a couple excerpts from my book. I actually have two books that are international bestsellers. I'll briefly talk about both of them in a minute, but I'll also tell you kind of the writing process, why I decided to write a book, because I know people are interested in that. They like to understand, what makes a person want to be an author, and how do you go about doing that? It is quite overwhelming and daunting at first. And then I'll talk a little about the writing process. And then finally, I'll end with some ideas on how you all can help become a mental health advocate. We all can do it, and it's something very simple that we can do in our own communities. So again, like I said, I'll spend hopefully we'll have 15 minutes or so for Q&A. If you are interested in either of my books and want a copy that is autographed by me, you can go to thestrengthtolive.com and order a book there, and then I'll gladly mail you a copy with my signed autograph in it. So let's get started. I'll start with just, thank you again, Joyce, for that wonderful introduction. I am a international bestselling author. It's pretty exciting to say that. Amazon 2 times with both books that I've been a part of. I'm trained in mental health first aid, and I'm a mental health advocate. I live in Naperville, Illinois with my family. It's just outside of the suburbs of Chicago. And I'm married to my high school sweetheart, Joyce's nephew. And we have 2 young adult daughters that are both studying at the University of Iowa. I grew up in a rural community in Iowa. I was the oldest of 4 children, and I spent my summer days swimming at the New Hampton pool and playing at the local park. And my childhood was very typical. I came from a very loving family, loving parents. I had lots of childhood friends, and I lived on a large acreage where I was able to roam and explore nature, which was one of my passions. And from all external appearances, we looked like a very typical Iowa family, yet something was a little off balance in our house, and that something was mental illness. And I'd like to give you a little better idea of what that was like growing up. And so I'm going to share an excerpt from my book, Ignite Your Wisdom. And this is a compilation book that shares multiple authors. There's about 30 authors in this book. And my chapter is entitled Little Voice on the Prairie. As a little girl, I watched episodes of Little House on the Prairie and thought how amazing it would be to have Pa Ingalls as my father. With his soft, kind expressions and warm, generous heart, Michael Landon perfectly portrayed the wholesome, loving, problem-solving father on the television show. So well, in fact, that my innocent 8-year-old mind thought the character Charles Ingalls, the actor, and actor Michael Landon were one and the same. As I watched the drama play out in Walnut Grove, the Ingalls' life seemed easy, carefree, and while there was always some sort of mishap taking place on the prairie, everything turned out fine by the end of the show. If there was a fight, the combatants would make up. No matter how dreadful or hurtful the situation was, there was always consolation at the end. Why couldn't it be that way in carefree in my house on the prairie? I wanted so desperately to be seen by my father, the way Laura Ingalls was validated by her pa. My father loved me tremendously, but it was a confusing, complex love. There was a certain amount of dysfunction that muddled my little girl mind like a hopscotch pattern, changing position in mid-jump. How could this hero I called Daddy, who would take me on adventures and play imaginary games with me, also be cruel, abusive, and vicious at times? We would be giggling under the bed covers one evening, and the next he'd be angry, wielding the threat of using a belt to scold me. Amongst laughter and good times, there was always something lurking in my home. I was confused when he would act erratically. I'd stay up late with my mom, waiting for him to come home. It wasn't until my teenage years that I realized my dad was dealing with mental illness his entire adult life. Dad would have bouts of depression, which would last months, followed by jubilant upswings, providing a false sense of hope. It was like living with two dads, loving dad and resentful dad. So when I wrote this chapter, Little Voice on the Prairie, it's really about me losing my voice in a split second as a child, and then finding my way back to regain my voice to be a mental health advocate. And so if you're interested in that, again, this book is filled with so many wonderful stories from people of all walks of life. So the first time that I heard of someone taking their life by suicide was when I was in the 4th grade, and I learned of the death of my elementary school principal. And I can vividly recall the look of despair on the face of my teachers at that young age of 9 or 10. And I wondered why anyone would want to end their life. And throughout my years of growing up in a small rural community of New Hampton, several people I knew or knew their family members had also taken their lives. And it wasn't until my teenage years, as I mentioned, that I learned that my father was battling a mental disorder. He had been drafted in the Vietnam War and was honorably discharged after suffering an apparent mental breakdown, which I believe really scarred him because he never wanted to ever talk about that part of his life. And I believe it was a turning point in which his environmental circumstances and life stressors, like going to war or being forced to go to war, intersected with a genetic predisposition, I should say, for mental illness. There are studies that have shown the great linkage between genetics and mental health disorders. In fact, especially mood disorders at a rate of 30 to 50% can be passed on. And so mental illness is a very complex disorder, and it usually stems from a combination of variables, several variables, some of those being environmental, biological, life stressors, and of course, genetics. And my hope as an advocate is that we can talk about mental health openly and honestly and help erase the stigma that still keeps people from getting the help they deserve. I also hope that in the near future, that through research, we'll be able to determine the genes that impact the neurotransmissions that work in the brain so that patients can get diagnosed more readily. Finding the right treatment today can take years, and most people that are suffering don't have the luxury of time, resources, or the patience to seek when they need help, and especially when they're living with continual suicidal thoughts on a day-by-day basis. So after high school, I went on to graduate from Iowa State University with a journalism degree, and I began working at the Des Moines Register, which was the paper in our state. And on my 24th birthday, my coworkers and I witnessed a man jump from a parking garage to his death. And I just felt like suicide was following me. It didn't matter the education or the socioeconomic status or a family upbringing. I just seemed to hear about suicides happening all around me. A coworker who I'd known for several years took his life at the age of 35. And I always knew him as a smart, good-humored human being. My daughter's high school was plagued with 3 suicides, seemingly back-to-back within a 2 to 3 year span. And 3 years prior to that, my father had chosen to end his life. So I knew I needed to do something, but I wasn't sure what that was. So I began to educate myself. I took a course in mental health first aid so that I could better understand the effects and the impact of mental illness. And I became certified in a suicide prevention training called QPR, which stands for Question, Persuade, and Respond. And it was through that work that I knew that I was educating myself and doing something to help the community. But I didn't realize at the time that I was preparing for what was to come. There was always this yearning to understand why so many people had died by suicide around me. And the questioning and constant thought in the back of my mind could no longer be quelled when I started to notice similar signs in my daughter of depression, dissociation, and severe anxiety. And she was about 15 years old at the time. She had had panic attacks since the 4th grade. So there was a progression that had started quite young in her childhood. So here's how I was feeling in the spring of 2016. This is an excerpt from chapter 1, and the title of the chapter is Candidly. I have often asked myself, why have so many suicides occurred in my birthplace? I can easily count over 10, 15, maybe even 20 deaths I had known over the years. Curious and struggling with the remembrance of unanswered questions, I went where most of us go to find answers. I asked Google, why have so many people died by suicide in New Hampton, Iowa? I typed that into the computer. It was such a strange request for the tech guru to reply to, but I was desperate to find answers. Asking Google seemed like the best technique to use when looking for clarity on something impossible to solve on my own. However, that one search on Google sent me down a road of self-discovery and ultimately became the catalyst that saved my daughter's life a year later. I promise I share more about that in upcoming chapters. But thank you, Google. The reason why that search became so important was because 2 years earlier, I had lost my father to suicide, which was influenced by his own struggle with mental illness. Since then, I began witnessing similar mental illnesses amongst my closest family. My 15-year-old daughter had been struggling with anxiety and depression for almost 6 years. Why did mental illness plague my family? I asked myself, why was this happening to my daughter? So I typed into the computer, why have so many people died by suicide in New Hampton, Iowa? The search came back with an answer at the very top of the page. The speaker was coming to my hometown of New Hampton, Iowa that evening on May 10th, 2016. The post read, we're super excited to bring Christine, an Iowa mom, and her message to the New Hampton community. We are a community and our children are in it, are with it. It's All Love, Only Love Coalition travels to communities and schools to speak to students, parents, and school administrators about the importance of healthy self-care for mind and body, and the importance of always being kind. By being educated on signs and symptoms of depression, particularly in children, we have a greater chance of seeking professional help fast and giving our children the childhood they deserve, one that can sometimes be paralyzed with depression, sadness, and anxiety. Christine Schmidt was the speaker presenting that evening. I learned through further investigation online that Christine was a mother, my age, and also a survivor of suicide. She had been traveling throughout Iowa on a mission to educate students about the effects of bullying and suicide. Christine, I found out, was coming to share her message after losing her 12-year-old daughter, Morgan, to suicide in April of 2014. Heartbreaking. The coincidence was too hard to ignore. What were the odds that someone who had lost a child to suicide was coming to speak in my hometown that very evening, the very day I typed those 12 words into my computer? I felt as if the universe had spoken directly to me and God had answered my prayer. There was no denying the signs. It was loud and clear. I had to meet and speak to Christine. So if I asked by a raise of hands in the room, and I'm not asking you to do this, but if I did, and I asked if who in the room knows someone who has died by suicide, I'd unfortunately expect to see far too many hands raised. It's estimated that for every suicide, that at least 10 people are impacted. And I'd venture to guess that number is far greater. And that impact means that there is a significant amount of people that are suffering in silence. Losing a loved one for any reason, of course, is traumatic. But losing a loved one to suicide adds layer upon layer of shame, guilt, anger, and blame on top of that grief. In another chapter titled Forgiveness, I explain what forgiveness should look like for survivors of suicide. Your first thought as you begin reading this chapter may be that this is going to be a chapter on learning how to forgive your loved one for what they did. It's understandable to think that would be a natural part of the healing process. They left, abandoning our dreams and futures. What they did was something hurtful in our minds. As we work through the healing process, we often feel we need to find a way to forgive them. It's natural to want to forgive our loved one for the act which took so much away from us. This might surprise you, however. I don't believe our loved ones need to be forgiven. Let me give you some context so you understand what I mean. When my grandmother developed breast cancer and it took her life, I never thought once that I needed to forgive her for getting cancer. The same is true for your loved one's illness. My dad doesn't need my forgiveness for developing an illness he didn't ask for and no doctor could cure. I'm thankful to Sam for helping me see this slight distinction and valuable lesson. When I interviewed him, there was a moment when I asked, "What did you say to your mother when she learned you had attempted a suicide? Did you ask her to forgive you?" My words cut like a knife. I could tell by his facial expression and physical jerk as it was if to say, "Wait a minute, what are you accusing me of? Do you think I meant to hurt my mother?" He was quick to correct me, and I'm so glad he did because I agree 100% with him. Sam went on to say, "I don't believe I have anything I need to be forgiven for. I didn't choose to have this disease, and I couldn't stop the suicidal thoughts on my own." I go back to my analogies of cancer and heart disease. I don't blame a loved one who has a serious heart condition and that is life-threatening. And we certainly wouldn't feel the need to forgive them if that disease caused them to die from a heart attack. Just like I didn't need to forgive my grandmother for developing cancer. No, I don't blame her for getting sick either. And there's no one else that I can think of that I've had to forgive for their death. Sam makes such a valid point that I totally understand why he was offended by my comment. And it's no coincidence how he responded to me in that manner so that I could share this point with you. So part of my healing journey included me traveling on humanitarian trips in which I spoke on mental health on stages, and I'd share the story of Morgan, the 12-year-old girl who was bullied and took her life. And the first time Well, actually, it was the second time I remember speaking on the stage was in Dunedin, New Zealand. And I was on a trip in 2017. And it was that time, at that moment on that stage, that the idea of this book began to take shape. After giving that talk on stage, I was surprised at how many people approached me to thank me for sharing my story, and then to go on to tell me how they had lost someone they loved to suicide. And the more I shared my story, the more people began to open up to me and share about their loss. People I had known for a long time, but never knew they had lost someone, to complete strangers who had wanted to tell me about their loved one and their death. I knew that my sharing was giving them permission to share stories with me. It was because I was vulnerable enough to speak about my loss that they could have the strength to do the same. So when I began to think about what I wanted to share in this book, I knew right away that I wanted this book to be something that anyone could read and gain some insight. And in pages 10 through 11, in the beginning of the book, I write about who this book is written for. I've given much thought to whom I've written this book for. There is not just one person I thought about during my writing process. In fact, if you ask me today, who should read this book, I would say everyone. I wish that every person, no matter whether or not they've been touched by suicide, picks up this book and finds a chapter that is meant for them to read. I hope they gain a nugget of wisdom to share with the world. However, I realize this is not a topic that everyone can comprehend. Not everyone is ready to delve into the abyss and bring themselves back to the surface, transformed with a newfound compassion and understanding of suicide. I wrote this book for those who have lost a friend or family member to suicide, the ones who are grieving in silence, dealing with shame and guilt, and are trying to put the pieces of their lives back together. I wrote this book for those whose grief is so profound that they are in crisis themselves, barely holding on and needing reassurance that the fog will lift. For those who fear a loved one is suffering with such intensity that they fear they may lose them to suicide and are desperately trying to navigate the sense of hopelessness that comes with not knowing what to do to save them. And finally, the strength to live is for anyone willing to explore complex grief, self-imposing fear, limiting beliefs, mental health, and what causes someone to want to end their life. This book will shed some light on the many questions surrounding suicide. This book is for courageous individuals who want to do the work to become mental health advocates and help change the trajectory of mental health around the world. It's in your hands now. This book is for you. So after that first nudge in New Zealand, it took me another 4 years to be writing this book because fear was holding me back. I didn't want to write a book about suicide, and I didn't want to write about what I had learned through my healing journey, but the calling was too strong. And I often say that I didn't choose to write this book. Instead, it chose me. And it was very healing to go through the process of writing the book. I used my own personal experiences and what my journey looked like to share that it was possible. And I really wanted other people to know that with, hard work and perseverance and through transformation, taking something very traumatic and turning it into a positive, that anyone could learn how to move forward with their life. And I had a vision when I set out to write the book. I wanted to share not only my personal story, but I wanted to share others who have survived a loss from suicide. So there are several different people that their stories are shared in this book. And when I sat down to think about whose stories I could share, I started to make a list of people that I had known, and the list started to grow. And before I knew it, the list of connections that I knew were over 20 or 30 people. And I was shocked. I was just amazed. And it kind of dawned on me that if I had been questioning why so many suicides have taken place in my hometown, which is a very small population of 3,500 people or less, I realized my question had been answered. And it's because suicide is prevalent all across the United States. And unfortunately, it's prevalent globally as well. And so the first time I sat down to write, I knew that I was onto something powerful, because 6 hours later, I lifted my head from my computer and I had an entire chapter, which ended up being titled Leroy in the published version of my book, which is the story of my father. And the more that I'd write, the more ideas would come to me, and I realized these ideas and what I needed to share in the book. And in the process of writing, I was actually dealing with some of the most challenging episodes with my daughter's mental illness. I was like living and writing about the devastation in real time. And it's probably why I'm most proud of the book, because I was able to really share the most vulnerable details of living a life with someone battling with suicidal ideation. And I could see what I needed to say so vividly on a day-by-day basis. It took almost 2 years of nights and weekends at my computer. And yes, there were times when writer's block, that is a real thing, it would creep in. And I would go for stints where I couldn't think of anything more to write. But for the most part, I kept having these downloads of ideas. So I might wake up in the morning and I just have an idea that I needed to have a chapter about how important our words were. And so I dedicated an entire chapter titled Words that, really speaks to the fact that it's so important how we choose our words, and in all parts of life, right? But also when someone uses the term committed suicide, there's a very distinct reason why that term was created, because it was illegal. And people would be punished if they had tried to end their lives. And of course, there's a very strong religious background in that too, and thinking that people that take their lives aren't worthy of heaven. So there's a lot of negative context around committed. Committed means an act of sin, or it's a crime. And really, the right way to talk about someone is to say that they died by suicide. Just no different than anyone else, died of a heart attack or died from cancer. But that term committed is really holds people back. It holds them back from getting the help they need. And so anyway, throughout the book, I also share things like how we can see signs and receive messages from our loved ones when they've passed. It's important to realize that they're always still with us. And it's a way to keep them alive in our hearts, and realizing that we're never truly disconnected from them ever. So there's some beautiful chapters about messages and signs and things like that. And then, of course, I had to interview several people. And that was really the hardest part of writing the book, was interviewing those people that had also survived a loss. And they were sharing their deepest, darkest moments with me. And I knew it was painful, and yet it was healing for them to share their stories. One woman in particular that I interviewed, she hadn't shared her story with anyone, not even her closest family members, in over 20 years since she lost her husband. And then Joan was her name. She went on to give a testimony in her church just a few months after she and I spoke. Think about that. She had held on to that story in silence for 20 years. But after 2 hours of opening up and sharing it with me, it allowed her to open up and tell her story to an entire church. That's why our stories are so powerful. So I completed my manuscript on May 1st of 2022, and then came the editing phase. And I was so lucky to have an editor and a publisher who believed in me and my vision. Not everyone would probably take on this book and want to have this be a book that they, wanted to take on. It's not an easy topic, obviously. So letting someone read my manuscript the first time was very, very scary to me. I had I had really poured a lot of my heart and soul on those pages. And so I had to get over that part of it, of course. And my publisher began reading my book, and she said so kindly to me, Cindy, you have 3 books in here, and I think you should write all 3. And while I was flattered by that suggestion, I told her that I did want this to be one book. And I did agree. I have 3 distinct themes running throughout this book. But I was convinced, and I still am, that this book needed to be something that everyone could read. And, perhaps one day I'll write a book on each of the themes, but I believe that this is what makes the book unique, is that I address the themes of simultaneously. So surviving the loss of someone, helping a family member who's struggling currently with a mental illness, and transforming the pain and sorrow into something powerful, like becoming an advocate. And so all 3 of those themes are throughout this book. So then over the last 6 months before the book was released, it really developed, and it took an even deeper and richer, meaningful perspective. And the editing that the suggestions they gave me, and then there was just more to provide. It was really neat to see that process happen. So the vision of me thinking that, people would read the book and work through their grief and their anger and their shame and devastation became this feeling that they'd walk away transformed into mental health advocates. And so that was really what I feel very proud about. And so that leads me to my final topic, which is how to become a mental health advocate. I mean, it sounds like that might take a long time to do, but I'm going to start actually with some statistics just to ground us so that we all understand how important it is, and that our impact can really make a difference. And I believe that we each have to take action in order to change the epidemic that we're currently in. So globally, 800,000 people die by suicide every year. 47,000 of those are in the US alone, and that's 1 suicide every 11 minutes. It's estimated that 1.7 million people attempt a suicide in the US, and 1 in 5 adults will develop a mental illness this year. Suicide rates have increased 36% between 2000 and 2021. It's the 2nd leading cause of death in children 10 to 14 years old. And it's the leading cause of death and claims more lives annually than war, murder, and natural disaster combined. So with statistics like this, it's not a matter of if you'll come across a mental health crisis in your lifetime, it's will you be prepared when it happens? And I believe, just like CPR, we can save lives by being trained how to respond to signs of suicide and how to help respond to mental health first aid. So like I said, you might think it takes a lot of work to become a mental health advocate, but I'm going to share 5 simple things that you can do that'll help make a difference. And the first one is just being very, very good with your own mental well-being, taking care of yourself. Just like the flight attendant always says, you have to put your oxygen mask on first before you can help others. When you take care of yourself first, it has a ripple effect on your family and those around you. And it starts with finding stress relieving activities that are proven to lower blood pressure and reduce cholesterol. And those things are no different than the things that we physically do, like getting regular sleep, exercising, maintaining a healthy diet, limiting alcohol, staying hydrated. It's all the things that we normally do. And I would say spending outdoors is another one of those great things. The second thing is that one of the most scientifically proven stress relievers or reducers is meditation. And this can be done with the entire family, especially with children. And I truly believe we need to be teaching this in schools. But even when my children were young and started to have these anxiety attacks and things like that, I developed a strategy of sitting down with them and just having them squeeze their muscles and then release them. And I would have them go from head to toe and feel the difference between that tension and the release. And that is something very easy that any of us can do. There's also several types of meditation. There are guided meditations that you can just turn on YouTube and listen to, and they'll take you through a visualization sometimes, or they'll have you focus on your breathing and focus on where you feel pain in your body. And it's all about awareness of your body and getting to a deeper conscious level where you're feeling less stress and anxiety. The third thing you can do is educate yourself, and you're doing that today by being here and showing up. And so I congratulate you on that. One other thing that I would offer is to follow NAMI, which is NAMI. It stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and they have a tremendous amount of resources. They're always putting out different blogs and things like that, and they're very up on their research. They're very up to date on their research. So NAMI is a great resource for anyone that's currently dealing with mental illness or has a family member, or you just want to get educated. And then fourth is taking a course. I mentioned that I'm trained in mental health first aid, and it's all about your response to when you find someone that's dealing in a crisis. And we all have probably witnessed this, but didn't realize that's what they were in, is they start to act. They're very agitated. They're very, you can tell that they're worked up about something. They have, they've experienced, or it's like they're almost experiencing a trauma over again, just because they've heard something or something's triggered them. And it's very easy to help bring them down from that level and help distress them. But I recommend two really good programs. The one is mental health first aider training, and that's usually over the course of a couple afternoons, a couple days, or QPR training, which is that question, persuade, respond. And that can actually be done online, and it can be done in as little as a few hours. So neither of them take a lot of time, and yet it's really good to understand some of those signs and signals. And then fifth and finally, we can all offer kindness to strangers when we see someone that's struggling. And I have a couple examples to give to you. Throughout my time, throughout the time that I was writing the book and things like that, I had this connection or understanding of people that were homeless. I could sense when, there was this additional grief, and I could sense there was mental illness happening. And so there was a homeless man that he kind of had a spa where he would sit during the day outside of a sandwich shop that my family and I like to visit. And so, anytime we would go visit or go to get a sandwich, I would stop and just say hello to him, ask him how he was doing. My family knew to run in and get a sandwich, and we'd bring a sandwich to him. It was just a moment to just give him, a connection, which is what we all need. And it was so important. I'm sorry, I'm going to take a cough drop here. Because I can sense this tickle coming on. Give me 1 minute. Sorry about that. I've been struggling a little bit with a cold. And of course, when I start to talk long, this is what happens. I apologize. Another example, though, is right after my father passed, I was sitting in a coffee shop with my husband, and I noticed a man sitting next to us, and he wasn't drinking a cup of coffee. He wasn't on his phone, which most people these days, if they're sitting alone, they're on their phones. He was just kind of sitting blankly, staring at the table. And I thought to myself, and in mid-sentence with my husband, I noticed him, and I kind of stopped what we were doing, and I turned my head and I said, I'm sorry to disturb you, but I noticed you're alone, and I thought maybe, I could offer my compassion, basically. And I just said, I hope that you're not struggling with something. And if you are, I hope that you would talk to someone about it. I just lost my father recently, and I'm more heightened to the sensitivities of other people. And I just wanted to let you know that someone cares. And that was really all I said. And I'll never know if it made a difference or if he really was struggling. But again, it's those moments that we take that we never will know whether or not we help someone. And then the last one that I'll share is I was traveling at O'Hare Airport, which is a busy airport, if you've ever flown through Chicago. And I was in the restroom, and a young mother, I could hear her. She was talking on her phone, and I could tell that she was very distraught. And she was talking, I believe, to her mother on the other end. And she was talking about, it sounded like she was in an abusive relationship. And it was one of those things where I didn't want to intrude again, but at the same time, I felt like I needed to do something. And so I walked up to her and I said, "Excuse me, ma'am." I said, "Are you okay? And do you need help?" And she looked at me, and she was on the phone, and she said, "Mom, someone here wants to help me." And I just thought to myself, if I was that mother on the other end of the phone and my daughter was going through that, I would be so grateful that someone offered help. So again, it's little things like that we can do on a day by day basis when we see or hear someone that's kind of going through that distress. And we'll never know if your smile or if your words of encouragement or even acknowledging someone's existence, like a homeless person, it just may give them the strength they need to live another day. I'm going to be wrapping it up here, but I'd like to read one more excerpt from the chapter titled Morgan. And I want to leave you with Christine's words. So this is chapter 11. If I can find it. All right, I was right at the page. Standing in Morgan's room the evening after her death, Christine examined all the Christian reminders she had instilled in her daughter. The Serenity Prayer, inscribed on a plaque, along with her Bible and rosary from her first communion, lay on the nightstand and dresser. A recent craft project in the letter M, along with stickers Morgan had used to describe herself: smart, funny, good friend, sister, baker, runner, sat still and lonely, and 2 bracelets in a small dish curled together, one Christine's and the other one Morgan's. As she touched Morgan's treasures, she made a pact with her. I'll work from here and you'll work from heaven. And somehow we're going to save lives and make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do something. So at this point, I will pause. I want to offer a couple of things. If you go to my website again, thestrengthtolive.com, I do have 2 free downloads. One is 10 tips for better mental well-being, things that you can do. And then also there's a download that you can print out on how to help a loved one in a mental health crisis. So again, thank you for your time. And now I'm happy to open it up for questions.
I'm going to ask Joyce to come up here and sit so that the recording can hear your question, Joyce. And if others of you have questions, if you'll come up and just sit and do that.
I just wanted to sit down. You know, of course, I've known Cindy and her family for a gazillion years, but I just wanted to add that I never knew of like your issues with your dad. Never knew any of that in that small town. I lived on the farm and never knew. And at a young age, I suspected Avery was having some issues. But it wasn't really talked about because it was always big family gatherings and stuff. And she has asthma, so we kind of always just, she's having an asthma attack. And, but deep down, I knew that she was struggling somehow. And I wanted to ask, I wanted to just let you know that your book, Shay, my middle daughter, she has a house rental, and she felt it was important to put that on like a coffee table, because she said, you know, when you rent a house, very often you forgot your book or whatever, or you pick up something and you just start going through it. And she felt it was important to have it at her rental home. And I wanted to ask if Kevin, as her husband, and Avery helped you with your editing.
Oh,
And they
yeah.
said, Mom, that's not true.
So both of them did read the book, or read, Kevin read, I think, all of the chapters before the editor. Avery and I read them together, because of course I was not going to write anything that would harm her or
Mhm.
make her feel uncomfortable. The beautiful thing that happened while I was writing this book is that she gained a sense of wanting to actually become an advocate as well. She has grown so much in understanding her illness. And she, will say to me, Mom, you helped save my life. And it's because we were so open about talking about it in our family. You're right, we didn't talk about it outside of the family, especially not when she, because she wasn't willing to talk about it at that time. But when we started to, and when, we really, it took a long time to get the right treatment. And I will tell you, my daughter went to a therapist, a psychologist for 2 years, and sat in that room and said nothing for 2 years, every week. It took that long for her to finally break down and finally have dialogue about what she was holding on inside. And it was really just all of her own, things of perfectionism, things that she wasn't worth, the self-worth aspects. But I say that because once she started to do that, and once she realized, oh, this isn't just, something I can control on my own. I need help. I need, medication to help manage it. And I need therapy on a consistent basis to help talk through it. So long story short, to answer your question, yes, we sat and read through the book, and, she was very, very adamant that she wanted me to continue with everything. I don't think there were very many edits that they asked me to remove. Even my mother, I had her read the chapters, because even the story of my father is pretty challenging, and she went through a lot with that as well. And so when she was done, she started to cry, and she said, I know this will help a lot of people. So I was very lucky and very grateful that my family has been 100% supportive on this, because that doesn't always happen.
Right.
Now I have 3 other siblings, and I know at least 2 of them have read the book. I'm not sure about the third. They're all very proud of me, but I can understand that not all of them want to relive and want to revisit some of that. So, and I respect that as well. And we all were at different ages and different, we all have different perspectives of what was going on in the family as well. Not everybody sees things through the same lens. And so I respect that of my siblings too. So
Tell them about when you had to go to the ER and what you were told when you, after they examined her. This blows me away.
I'm
The time about, I think you know which one I mean.
okay. So when she would go into the ER for panic attacks, I think this is what you're saying. And to the point where she would hyperventilate herself to be like, her limbs would go numb. I had to carry her into the emergency room one time, and they put her on oxygen right away. And it took, several hours to bring her, kind of calm her down. And they gave her a like a benzodiazepine that, kind of brings down that stress level in the body. And the emergency room doctor said to me, we needed to nip this in the bud. And I didn't understand what that meant at the time. I've also been in the hospital on different occasions where I was there for my sister had been in the ER for a panic attack, but she was having heart palpitations. And sometimes panic attacks can come in different forms. I've actually experienced them as well, where your heart just kind of skips beats and you don't really feel like something's going on, but you can feel your heart just kind of, palpitating wrong. And so one time when I went in, I was told, or I was basically the doctors assumed that I was on drugs, and they didn't even think to ask me. I was a college student at the time and under a lot of stress. It was finals week. But they didn't even think to ask me that could it be something, related to stress. They just assumed that I was on drugs. And then my sister had a panic attack, and we were there, and luckily hers was the same. It was the heart palpitations, nothing more serious than that. But a code blue came in, and they were bringing in a patient, and we're with the nurse at the time, and the nurse turns to us and says, I'm sorry, we have to go. We don't like to help these types of situations, but we have a suicide attempt coming in, and we don't like to help patients that don't want to live. It's just that alone, when I've heard those things from the medical community, the people that we trust when we come to them for our health, when they're responding in those kinds of ways, it's hard to imagine why anyone would want to get help if they've ever heard or experienced anything like that. So, yeah, I think, did I cover what you were thinking there?
Yeah, that was the one I
figured that was it. Yeah.
Next, anybody?
Hi, Cindy, I'm Lorraine. Could you just explain, you used a term a couple of times when you said you're trained in mental health first aid. When I think of first aid, I think of CPR and all of those things. Can you just explain a little more about what mental health first aid is?
Sure. So mental health first aid is something, and I'm glad to see it's being brought into more of the first responders, and police forces are now getting trained in it. Because if you think about a lot of violent activity or home disturbances, or calls for where domestic violence is taking place, those are all a lot of times heightened by a mental health crisis. That's what's really kind of happening in a lot of those situations. And so understanding when you come into that situation that you're dealing with a mental health crisis, not necessarily someone that is in sound mind, in a place of rationalization, and be able to de-escalate that situation. So it could be someone that's having a panic attack. Maybe you're at the mall and you see someone that's hyperventilating. Being able to approach them and say, is there anything I can do to help you? I'm experienced in this. I understand what you're going through. Let me, help you get to a safe spot or whatever. To helping a loved one who calls you and says, I don't want to live any longer. And, if you get a call like that, that is a real crisis situation. If someone's at the point of saying they don't want to live, that needs to be taken seriously and urgently. And that means sitting with them until help arrives, calling 911. So it's more than just de-escalating, but it is ensuring that they don't harm themselves in that time frame. It could be calling a suicide prevention hotline number, calling 911, whatever you do to react. And it's then ensuring that person takes it a step further and gets the help they need. So if the crisis happens and they're sent to an emergency room, typically an emergency room will only hold them for 24 hours, whatever that time frame is. Well, they bring back down their stress level in the body through a lot of times through medication. But then after that, it's very important that that person then seeks immediate treatment with a psychologist and a psychiatrist. And a lot of times people that are dealing with that mental health crisis just don't have the capacity or the stamina, I will say, to follow through on booking an appointment and going to that appointment. And so as a mental health first aider, you support them in ensuring that they have an appointment set up, that that you take them to that appointment. So it's being that person of support, just as you would with, a family member that was dealing with another serious health issue, such as cancer or heart disease. And yeah, so hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And Avery told you once that she had a plan, right, Cindy?
She did. Yeah, she did.
And how to-
That was really one of the hardest moments for me, was when I had to sit down and ask her. And I thank you for bringing it up, Joyce, because that is probably the number one thing as a mental health first aider that you can do, is if you see the signs and someone's not saying anything, you need to be upfront and you need to ask them, just say, are you in a crisis where you're thinking of harming yourself? And if they answer yes, ask another question. Do you want to take your life? And if they say yes to that, you ask them, do you have a plan? And when you ask that series of questions, you know the level of severity you're dealing with, and they may not always be truthful with you either. You have to really, if they answer, or if anyone ever says, I don't feel like I can hang on any longer, I don't want to be here anymore. They might say it in another way than just saying, I want to, die, or I want to take my life, or I want to kill myself. They'll say it in ways like, I'm such a burden. I really just don't want to live any longer. But anyone that says that is in a mental health crisis, and you need to act immediately, because those thoughts that they're having don't just go away. They may subside for a bit of time, but they will ultimately come back. And it's in those moments of them being alone and having those thoughts that things can happen. Hi there.
Hi, my name's Linda Grover, and I have a friend here in Pagosa, and I invited her to come today to come hear your talk. And this is what she does for a living. She has heard your talk. I don't know if she's been to a live presentation or not, but I just wanted you to know that there is somebody here in Pagosa that could do a workshop for us. And she works for UNM, University of New Mexico. And so she could be a resource for us. She's a really sweet gal and real easy to talk to. Her name's Laura.
Laura, okay. That's awesome. Yeah,
Right.
you should have Laura come in and do a training for you all. That would be fantastic.
I think she would probably do that. She already knows a couple of us because we play mahjong with her. And in our Sunday school class, I don't think there's anybody else in here that's in my Sunday school class, but we had a couple that's older than us. I'm in my 70s, and they had a son that committed suicide. They recently moved to Indiana.
Oh, Indiana.
Yes, and but for a long time, our part of our Sunday school class would be talking about what they were going through and what a shock it was to them. And it was hard, but it was therapeutic for them, I could tell. And they moved this last 6 months. And one of the things I did was I went out to their house. They wanted to take all of their pictures, thousands of pictures, because the husband is a photographer, big time photographer. But they wanted to organize them and take them out of old albums and put them in different books. And so I was helping Joy do it. And we would come across pictures of Mark, and she would stop and tell me stories. It just, I felt like I knew him. And
Right.
now she's able to tell sweet, sweet stories. And it's just, I can tell it helps people.
It does.
So one last thing that has nothing to do with mental health is I went to the same high school as Michael Landon, and his name was Eugene Orowitz, and he was a javelin thrower.
Oh, that's so funny. What a nice random thing.
He was a couple years older than me, but my friend Snuffy Smith, her brother was a javelin thrower with him.
Oh, that's so funny. Thank you for sharing that.
Anybody
Small
else?
world.
Okay. Well, let me ask our ladies on Zoom, Barbara and Ruth, do you, either of you have a question you'd like to ask?
Yes, I do, okay. What about, how do you handle someone who would say, if you do this or that, and I can explain what I'm particularly talking about, but I don't know whether that matters, then I'll just commit suicide.
Is a threat?
Correct.
Yeah, okay, and would it be better if I explained what particular thing I'm talking about or not?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think I can kind of understand. I mean, I think that happens. I think that happens in spousal situations a lot of times. I think that.
With my daughter's husband, that said that,
Okay.
to my
Yeah.
daughter, but
Yeah.
I could go into detail, but.
Well, I'm sorry you're dealing with that, and I'm sorry your
Well,
daughter's.
it's been a long time ago. It's
Okay.
been, they've been married 28 years and it was probably 22 or 3 years ago that he
Okay.
said that to her.
Yeah.
And they're still married because she stayed. She
Yeah.
didn't, she didn't
Yeah.
even take the children. That's really what it was.
I gotcha. Well, that is a tough one. I mean, people can make threats that they don't necessarily are going to act on just because of something that, like you said, taking children away could cause someone to say that. But in my opinion, if someone ever does make that threat, I would still take it very seriously, just because of what I've seen and witnessed and how many people that I've known have done that. And I do know that major life stressors like that can cause people to end their lives. So it is a serious threat and should be taken seriously. And I would probably, what I would do is I would say to that person, the threat that you're making sounds like you are in a mental health crisis, and I'm going to call 911 right now. And that's how I would react and respond to that. Now, it could be very difficult to get someone treated unless they have, so what happens is, we all have free will, right? And if we make a statement like that, and then we say, well, no, I'm not going to go get help. It's very difficult to get someone help when they are not willing to accept it themselves. But in a lot of states, there are some laws that say if they have made threats like that to themselves or anyone else, there is a holding period that a judge can actually order them to be held for mental health evaluation. And that's usually what happens in those types of situations. And so, and that's a tricky thing as well, because you can hold someone for 24, 48 hours on a medical health or a mental health evaluation. And if there's no follow-up after that, and there's no therapy or no psychiatrist visit or no, nothing that's going to help them get better from that, it just kind of pushes that threat down the road a little bit sometimes. So it's a very challenging thing. It's not, even if I had cancer and I said, I'm going to deny any medical treatment, I have the right to do that. So it's the same thing with mental health. The only difference is that, unfortunately, the person that's going through the mental health isn't able to rationally think that through. And so there were many times where we wanted to get my father help. We just knew that he was, he would be in such dissociation, just so depressed and unable to, really do anything. But he was unwilling. He had tried medications. They made him sick. He tried them. They made him feel funny. I mean, there's a host of different reasons why, or they make you feel better. And then people stop taking their medications thinking they're better. And that's not necessarily the case. So it's a very challenging situation, but I would, if the person that's being threatened, is in a threatening situation, they need to take care and protect themselves first and foremost. I would say that. And then secondly, if there's anything that they can do to help the spouse or someone else that is going through that, whatever measures they can do to try to save the other person as well. But again, you know, you don't want to be in a physically violent situation if that's happening. So it's a very difficult situation. Thanks for the question.
I would appreciate it. I don't know whether these issues have gone, as I say, they just celebrated their 28th wedding anniversary. They're in their 50s.
Yep.
They're probably about your age.
Yeah, I'm going to be celebrating my 27th wedding anniversary this year. So
Okay, well, anyway, and they seem to be, she loves him and he seems to love her. And their children are our only grandchildren. They are twin girls who are almost 25. Okay, the twin girls are almost 25. And one has just become a mother for the first time, has a 2-month-old baby boy. So we are now great grandparents for the first time. And he, the grandfather now of the new baby, I have a picture of him holding that baby, loving the baby. So, I mean, things on the surface, things seem to be okay, but I haven't forgotten knowing that he wouldn't get a job. That I do think I need to explain this. And he just hadn't worked for years. And
so he probably was struggling with mental illness. I mean, that's a telltale sign.
He is a cancer survivor twice before they ever met. Okay, he had gone through cancer and almost died before they ever met and married. And that's been in the back of his mind, the fact that cancer is going to come back, or something for years. And he said he can't work because he can't do this, can't do that. And so she was going to take the twin girls, they were elementary age, and leave. And that's when he said, you do that and I'll commit suicide and the girls will come home from school and they'll find me and they'll never forget. See? And the only reason I know this is she shared it with her sister, who shared it with us. She did not share that with us, but she did share it with her sister. So that's how we found out. But as I say, that's been years.
Yeah. Well, and I think that people can go into crisis and come back out of crisis as well. They can be in a moment because of life stressors or the environment. And I said, it's never just one, usually never just one thing that causes that kind of crisis. It's usually a combination of, what's happening, life stressors with the family, biology, and then there's probably is some sort of predisposition that he's dealing with as well. So yeah, all my best to you on that and to your daughter.
Things are beautiful now, with this baby boy. I mean, the fact we have 2 daughters and twin granddaughters, having a little boy is going to be something new.
Yeah, it is. That's exciting.
Just to live a few more years to enjoy him. My husband is 90 and I'm 84.
Oh my gosh. Congratulations.
And he's 2 months old. So who knows how much of his life we'll get to see before we're no longer around. But
well, enjoy all of it.
Okay, I'm Barb, and
Hi,
I'm
Barb.
part of the group here, and I have a marketing question for you. I am a former teacher, and I'm just wondering if the counselors, the therapists in the school systems, especially upper elementary, middle school, has your book been marketed to institutions like that? Because I think they need it.
Oh, well, thank you for that. And so I have yet to do a lot of marketing. Most of the work that I've done has really been organic. Because I work a full-time job as well. This isn't my full-time gig. I also have a corporate job, but I do have. So actually, when I wrote the book, I wanted several people in the field to read it as well. So I had them pre-read it and provide their feedback, and some of them gave testimonials in the front of the book. And several of them did ask for copies for their clinics. I have a couple of people that I'm working with right now. They want to get copies in every single one of their therapists' hands. So I agree with you. I think this is a perfect opportunity for therapists, because even though they're trained through the education, some of them have not had experience of losing a loved one to suicide, and to have that understanding and be able to actually, there's a lot of techniques that I refer to in the book, and they're techniques that I've had therapists say, I could sit down with a patient and walk through some of these things with them. So I love your idea of marketing, and if you've got some ideas and thoughts, let me know. But yes, I think that's,
Pass them to Joyce.
yeah. I have joined a lot of Facebook groups that are like therapist type groups and things like that, just sharing resources and things. And so I've done a little bit, but nothing more broadly.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Cindy. It's been a pleasure to have you. I think we've all learned something. So The Strength to Live, a wonderful, it sounds like Joyce has given us copies of both of your books to put on our church bookshelf. So we're doing our part in marketing, and we will definitely make sure that this video is made available to the other ladies in Utah and Western Colorado. And we wish you the very best as you go forward with your career.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate you having me.
Love to the
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a kid time.